My name is Rosalind Hawthorne, though everyone calls me Rosie. I'm 66, widowed for nearly a decade with hands calloused from 40 years of sewing in Charleston's old textile mills. I've spent my life keeping my family afloat, mending not only fabric, but hearts, dinners, and bank accounts. I never imagined that the woman I raised my own daughter could turn her back on me in this way. It started with a knock at the door, sharp and impatient. I opened it to find Celia standing there, suitcase in hand, her eyes hard and unreadable. "Mom, I need this done now," she said, though I wasn't sure what she meant. Before I could answer, she shoved me aside the door, crashing against my shoulder. I stumbled, barely catching myself on the banister. Then she grabbed my phone from the counter, flinging it across the wooden floor. It shattered into pieces with a hollow crash. My pulse raced. "Celia, wait." I tried to reach for it, but she slammed the door, locking me inside, and walked away with a cruel final click. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sank to the floor, my knees shaking, staring at the fragments of my only link to the outside world. No phone, no keys, no way to call for help. My throat tightened, my stomach knotted. Water, food. The thought of being trapped without either clawed at me like an animal. The house felt different now, familiar yet hostile, every shadow and creak magnified. I pressed my hands against the floorboards, willing some sense of control back into my body. My mind raced through every option, every neighbor, every friend I might have called. Nothing. Celia had anticipated it all. I leaned back against the wall, feeling the panic rise, and realized this was only the beginning. The hours stretched ahead, unyielding and merciless. I had no choice but to wait and to wonder how I could endure the isolation she had planned for me. The front door clicked shut behind Celia, the sound echoing through the empty house like a hammer striking metal. I pressed my palms against the cool hardwood floor, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. The suitcase wheels had barely disappeared down the driveway before a weight settled on my chest. A terrifying realization that I was truly alone. No food, no water, no phone. The smallest sounds outside, the distant honk of a car, the wind ruffling the shutters, sounded like footsteps, creeping closer, each one amplifying the panic that gripped me. I staggered to the kitchen, opening cabinets and drawers with a desperation that left them empty and still. The pantry offered only a few cans, long expired. The fridge hummed, almost mocking me, containing nothing but spoiled leftovers. My throat was dry. My lips cracked. I sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees, and closed my eyes. Images of Celia as a child flickered through my mind, her tiny hands reaching for my own, her laughter echoing through the garden, the way she had clung to me after thunderstorms. The contrast with this moment, this cold cruelty, made my chest ache in a way I hadn't thought possible. How had my little girl grown into someone so calculating, so willing to abandon me in my own home? Hours passed slowly. I counted them in silent increments, feeling my stomach churn, my head pound my body, weakening with every passing moment. Fear gnawed at me like a living thing, and yet somewhere beneath it, a stubborn ember of resolve flickered. I would not let this house, this life I had built, become the place of my undoing. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I had to endure to survive until I could turn the tables. The evening shadows grew long, stretching across the floors I had polished for decades, and the air grew heavy with quiet menace. I leaned back against the wall, listening to the empty rooms, knowing the true trial was just beginning. I sat on the edge of the living room couch, the weight of the silence pressing down on me, and my mind drifted back decades. After my husband walked out when Celia was just 6, I became both mother and father, provider and comforter. The small apartment we lived in smelled faintly of fabric and detergent. my hands raw from hours at the sewing machine, stitching together a life that had been torn apart. I remembered the nights I worked double shifts at the textile mill, returning home exhausted only to help Celia with her homework, braid her hair, or fix a dress for a school recital. Every paycheck was a careful calculation. Rent, first groceries, second, and whatever was left I saved for her education. I remember the pride swelling in me when I managed to enroll her in ballet classes, then soccer, then piano lessons juggling shifts, and overtime to cover every fee. I saw her face as she walked across the stage at the end-of-year recital, her smile wide eyes sparkling with the kind of joy only a child can have, and I felt the ache of every sleepless night dissolve for a moment. I remembered the first day of high school, when her backpack ripped and I stayed up late mending it with my own hands. I remembered depositing checks to pay for her college tuition, making choices that meant going without myself, skipping new shoes, postponing my own repairs, sewing dresses from fabric scraps. All those years, I believed that love alone could sustain us. I believed that sacrifice, dedication, and devotion were enough to ensure her happiness and gratitude. I never questioned it, never asked for more than her presence and respect in return. Yet now, sitting here in the echoing quiet of the house, she had abandoned me, and the contrast was unbearable. The same hands that had stitched a life together for her now rested helplessly on my lap. I could see every hour spent, every penny, saved, every ounce of energy poured into raising her, and the sting of invisibility that had grown over the years. Even in the memory of those proud, joyous moments, the shadow of betrayal loomed. I loved her with everything I had, and yet that love had not shielded me from the cold reality of being taken for granted. I could still hear the echoes of small arguments from years ago, each one now sharp and revealing in a way I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Celia's entitlement had crept in slowly, like water seeping under a door unnoticed until it had soaked the entire floor. I remembered her teenage years when a simple request for help with chores was met with an eye roll or a dismissive sigh. "Mom, I'm busy," she'd say, even as I balanced bills in one hand and a grocery bag in the other. There were subtle manipulations, too. Little guilt trips disguised as concern. Comments meant to shape my choices, to bend my will without ever demanding outright obedience. "You don't need to worry about that, Mom. I've got it," she'd say. But the relief in her voice was always for her own convenience, not for mine. I would smile, nod, and adjust my plans, thinking I was helping, only to realize later that my own needs had been quietly erased from our household. Even as a young adult, she began to prioritize her own comfort over mine. When I suggested an early dinner together, she would drag out conversations with friends or linger over texts, leaving me to eat alone in the quiet kitchen. I accepted it as part of raising a growing girl, never imagining these small dismissals would grow into something far harsher. Now, sitting alone in the shattered silence of the house, she had left me, trapped in the weight of decades pressed down. Every overlooked effort, every ignored gesture of care, every sacrifice I had made flashed through my mind with relentless clarity. The pride, the love, the long hours, all of it had quietly faded from her consideration. For the first time, I understood the subtle erosion of respect, the invisible cracks that had been forming in our relationship over years. It was not a single act of cruelty that brought me here. It was accumulation, the invisibility, the disregard. And now it had manifested in the ultimate act of betrayal. The first night alone had passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion, but as the morning light seeped through the curtains, something shifted inside me. The panic that had seized my chest began to ebb, replaced by a sharp, steady focus. I was alone, yes, but I was not powerless. Not yet. I moved through the house, slowly taking in every detail. The broken phone lay on the kitchen floor, a testament to Celia's control. but it also became a symbol of my opportunity. If I could not rely on ordinary communication, I would find other ways to ensure she could not take me entirely off the map. My mind raced through possibilities: hidden cameras in key rooms, notes documenting every interaction, small backups of information I could use if the situation escalated. I imagined my steps as carefully as I had imagined sewing each seam in decades past. Just as I had stitched together garments to protect and provide for my daughter, now I would stitch together a plan to protect myself. I found the old safe in the study, the one I had rarely used, and began gathering important documents, bank statements, insurance papers, a list of every time I had lent money or paid for something significant for her. I would need proof, a record of the life I had built and the sacrifices I had made. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the subtle thrill of agency. I was no longer just a mother reacting to her daughter's whims. I was a strategist, a woman reclaiming the territory she had once ceded in the name of love. Each small action: checking locks, reviewing old receipts, setting aside notebooks to chronicle interactions, felt like laying the foundation of a fortress, one I would not let anyone breach. I paused in the living room, letting the quiet of the house settle around me. I thought of the little victories I had experienced raising Celia: the first ballet recital, the first bike ride without training wheels, the first college acceptance letter. Each one had required patience, careful planning, and determination. That same discipline could serve me now. A cautious optimism bloomed in my chest. Fear still lingered, but it had a companion purpose. I would endure. I would observe. I would prepare. And when the time came, I would act. I moved quietly through the house, every creak of the floor a reminder to tread lightly. The shattered phone on the counter had been replaced with a small secret device I had purchased weeks ago, long before Celia's cruelty had escalated. I set it up to record, making sure its angle captured the front door and living room. Every word, every step, every hint of manipulation would be documented. In the study, I rifled through old files collecting bank statements, receipts, and notes that traced every time I had lent money or paid for something for Celia or her husband. Each document told a story of my devotion, my sacrifices, my careful planning for their comfort, while I quietly endured neglect in return. I carefully organized each piece, stacking them neatly in a folder labeled Evidence. I found the photographs tucked away in the attic, moments Celia had tried to erase from memory: her first school play, her birthday parties, the tiny graduation celebrations. I scanned them, pairing them with receipts, creating a timeline that would show the contrast between my efforts and the disregard I now faced. I also prepared contingency plans. If confrontation became dangerous, I would retreat to the study, locking the door and calling a trusted neighbor or lawyer. I memorized the layout of the house for strategic advantage and rehearsed what I would say, what I would reveal, and how I would stay calm. Sitting for a moment, I allowed myself to think like Celia and her husband. What would they do if they realized I had collected all of this? How might they try to discredit me or escape responsibility? Anticipating their moves gave me a sense of control I had not felt in years. By the time dusk fell over Charleston, the folder of evidence lay ready on the desk, and every camera and recording device was in place. For the first time, the fear that had dominated me began to shift into something sharper: strategy, purpose, and the knowledge that I could act and that I would. The sound of tires crunching on the driveway made my heart beat faster, though I kept my face neutral. Celia's car rolled to a stop, and I could see her through the window, her posture sharp, her movements deliberate. Beside her, her husband stepped out holding a small duffel bag, his expression casual but guarded. I waited until the front door opened and they stepped inside. Celia's eyes flicked toward me, sizing me up as if she expected fear or apology. You've been keeping busy, I see, she said, with a cool edge dragging her voice over the words like a blade. I smiled faintly, masking the anticipation that had been coiled tight in my chest for hours. Her husband followed her in, shifting uneasily, when he noticed my calm demeanor. "Everything all right, Mom?" he asked, his tone careful, perhaps sensing a tension he didn't fully understand. Celia moved through the living room, brushing past me, her hand briefly grazing the counter. "I hope the place is in order," she added, a subtle warning embedded in her casual remark. I nodded, keeping my movements slow, deliberate, measured. Every step I took, every glance I offered, was calculated to appear ordinary, while my mind cataloged their expressions, their body language, their unsuspecting overconfidence. She poured herself a drink, leaning on the counter, and letting a small smirk curl at the edge of her lips. "I wonder how you've been passing the time all alone," she said the words, light, but the underlying condescension sharp. I met her gaze steadily, letting the silence stretch, refusing to react to the jab. Every comment, every gesture built the tension higher. My pulse hummed beneath my composure, each beat a reminder that the moment I had prepared for was near. Soon, every subtle remark, every small attempt at dominance would meet the weight of the truth I had been quietly assembling. I stepped back toward the kitchen, arranging my posture, my breathing slow and controlled. The confrontation was coming, and I would not flinch. I took a deep breath and moved toward the study, gesturing for Celia and her husband to follow. Their eyes narrowed suspicion, mingling with unease. "What is it now?" Celia asked, her voice sharp, but I could see the faint quiver of uncertainty in her stance. I opened the folder I had prepared over the past week, sliding photographs across the desk, receipts for tuition bills, for extracurricular activities, and snapshots of moments they had tried to dismiss or erase. Celia's smirk faltered as she bent closer, her hand twitching as if she wanted to snatch the papers away. "These are all the times I sacrificed for you?" I said steadily, my voice calm but edged with the authority that had been absent for too long. "Every dollar, every hour, every decision I made to give you a better life is documented here. And every lie, every manipulation, every moment you thought you could disregard me, I've recorded that too." Her husband's face paled as he glanced at a recording device hidden in the corner, capturing every word, every gesture, every calculated dismissal. "Rosie, this isn't fair," he said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Celia's hands clenched into fists, her jaw tightening. "You can't just... This is private? These are..." She faltered, searching for words that would undo the truth laid bare in front of her. I met her gaze directly. "Private or convenient, every conversation, every demand, every attempt to control me is here. You've underestimated what I can do, but I am not powerless anymore." Panic began to show in small gestures, fidgeting hands, darting eyes, shallow breaths. The control they once held so effortlessly over me slipped, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Their dominance, built on my compliance, crumbled under the weight of the evidence. I remained calm, every movement deliberate, every word measured. The air shifted as the moral authority of truth filled the room, pressing against the walls like an invisible force. For the first time in years, I did not shrink or apologize. I had prepared, observed, and waited, and now the power was mine to hold. Celia's eyes widened, her voice barely a whisper. Her husband's mouth opened, then closed as he struggled for a response. I could see the realization dawning in their expressions. The person they had thought fragile, submissive, and obedient was in fact fully capable of standing against them. The confrontation had begun, and the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. I closed the folder of evidence with deliberate care, letting the weight of years of preparation settle around me. Celia and her husband stood frozen, their earlier confidence replaced by disbelief. For the first time, the quiet house felt like mine again. From now on, I said, my voice steady. I make the rules here. My time, my home, my money, none of it is yours to manipulate. I watched Celia's smirk vanish, replaced by the sharp edge of panic. Her husband's shoulders slumped, the power he had once assumed now crumbling in real time. I moved to the desk and began contacting my lawyer, arranging updates to my will and legal protections for the property. Each call, each confirmation felt like a stitch sewing back the seams of my life that had been pulled apart over decades. No longer would I be an afterthought in decisions that affected me most. Celia tried to protest, her voice quivering. Rosie, this isn't. I said enough, I interrupted gently but firmly. You have shown me exactly who you are. Now you see that there are consequences to every action. The realization in their eyes was undeniable. They had underestimated me for too long, relying on my compliance and fear. But fear had been replaced by resolve. The home that had once been a stage for their entitlement was now a fortress of my autonomy. I walked through the rooms, slowly touching the surfaces, breathing in the familiar smells of my life reclaimed. Plans for my own future, long deferred, for their comfort began to form. Travel friends, hobbies, my life would finally reflect me, not their whims. For the first time in years, relief and triumph coursed through me. The house, the property, even the air around me belonged entirely to me now. The morning sunlight spilled across the living room, warm and steady, and for the first time in years, I felt fully at peace in my own home. I moved slowly, touching the surfaces, noticing details I had overlooked while consumed by worry, obligation, and betrayal. The house belonged to me, and with it came a freedom I had long denied myself. I reached for my phone, not the shattered one Celia had destroyed, but the new device I had purchased in secret, and called Amalia. Her voice was bright and welcoming, and we talked as if no months of fear and isolation had passed. Plans for lunch walks, and even a small sewing project we had long postponed, filled me with a quiet joy. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about the life I wanted, not dictated by my daughter's whims, not constrained by her sense of entitlement. Friends I had neglected over the years became part of my mornings again. I explored new hobbies, revisited old books, and tended to the garden that had long gone untended. I reflected on the sacrifices I had made and the love I had given, acknowledging both the pain and the strength it had forged. Those lessons had brought me here, able to assert boundaries, reclaim my dignity, and embrace the life I had earned. Sitting on the porch with a cup of tea in hand, I watched the Charleston sun dip toward the horizon, feeling anticipation for the days ahead. The past could not be changed, but my future was entirely mine to shape.